And tonight's program, One Person, No Vote, a conversation with Carol Anderson, is presented jointly with KCUR 89.3 and on behalf of American Public Square and KCUR, welcome. We would like to thank American Public Square's presenting sponsors, Sue Seidler and Louis Nerman, the Hall Family Foundation, Z-Trip, the Abernathy Charitable Trust, the City of Kansas City, H&R Block Foundation, and the supporters of tonight's program, Cyprian Simchowitz and Jerry White and Ursula Tarasi. We'd also like to thank tonight's partners, Park University, for this beautiful venue, Rainy Day Books, and the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Cass, Clay, and Platte. American Public Square is a member-supported organization. I want to say thank you to all of our American Public Square members in the audience tonight. We sincerely appreciate you joining us on our mission to change the tone and quality of public discourse. If you're not an American Public Square member, your playbill contains information on how to join, and I and all the other folks in the black and white American Public Square t-shirts will be available at the reception after the program if you would like to join tonight. KCUR is proud to bring you news you trust and events like these that engage the community on important issues. To support KCUR financially, go to kcur.org and look for the red Donate button. Park University is live streaming this event. You can link to the live stream from the American Public Square Facebook page, and if you're watching the live stream now, you can submit questions via the American Public Square Facebook page. Additionally, the video of tonight's program will be available in the coming days on the American Public Square website. This is a very important bit. If you did not register for tonight's event, or if you were registered as someone's guest, you can register now by going to americanpublicsquare.org. By registering and providing us with your email, it'll allow us to send a link to the survey for tonight's program, as well as information about future American Public Square programs. If you've attended our events before, you will recognize the tools that we employ to facilitate civil, fact-based conversations. First, you'll find a fact sheet in your playbill. There is the information about tonight's guest. You'll also find some relevant facts about tonight's topic, as well as a link to more facts and information on the topic. We are able to provide this because of the generous support of the William T. Kemper Foundation. And I'm so tickled to see everybody opening up and checking out our beautiful fact sheet. Inside your playbill, you'll also find a question and a fact check sheet. When you have a question or a fact check, please write it down on the sheet and then hold it up high. A volunteer, also in the black and white t-shirts, will come by and collect it. Don't wait until we're on a break to submit your question. Go ahead and turn those in as soon as you have a good one. Finally, one of our tools is the roving reporter. And tonight, we are pleased to announce that our roving reporter is Sylvia Marie Gross. Let's see, where is... Yay, Sylvia, thank you. She will be asking the questions submitted by you, the audience. So definitely hold those up as soon as you have a question to ask. Also with us tonight is Peggy Lowe, who will be, hello Peggy, thank you, who will be joining us during the program. Another American Public Square tool is the fact checker. Tonight our fact checker is Tom Burns. Thank you, Tom. And we have civility bell ringers with us in the audience as well. Tonight our civility bell ringers are Bob Kerr, Elaine Zislin, and Mo Azim. And they will be ringing the bell if the tone of this conversation becomes less than civil. So let's do a trial run. Oh, louder. Yes, very good, very good. Okay. We ask that you not clap during the panel discussion, and following the program there will be a reception, and one person, no vote, will be available purchase and have signed by the author. It is now my very great pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Tyrene Johnson. Michelle is a reporter covering race, culture, and identity for KCUR. She's been a newspaper reporter, an employment attorney, a diversity and inclusion speaker, a columnist, and is a local and national playwright. She is an author of 3 books about diversity and 1 book about her grandmother. Michelle received her degree in journalism from the University of Kansas and her law degree from the University of Missouri-Columbia. But she bleeds blue and red all day, every day. Michelle?
Thank you. You know, rock top J Rock.
Okay.
Well, this is exciting. This is great. And I'm glad I'm up here doing this instead of being in charge of the civility bill. Because if I was in charge of the civility bill, you know, my threshold would probably not be very civil. So, we will have a way more civil conversation with me being here. So, this is so exciting. I picked up Carol from her hotel today, and we became fast friends in about 3 minutes. I'd say by the second red light, first. Because I had just been wrapping myself up in your book, and man, there's a lot here to unpack. I know that this is just going to be surface talk and surface questions, but first of all, I just want to thank you for giving me a hug, because since Trevor Noah has hugged you, what's that, 1 degree, 2 degree separation? So that works for me. Okay. So, you know, the first question that I have to ask is just kind of obvious, but it's so important. You know, the elections, midterms are around the corner. So why is the subject of voter suppression, I don't know, more important now than, say, the last midterm election?
I would say that, in fact, it was important in the last midterm election. It was important in the 2016 presidential election. And it is important now because each time when we systematically deny American citizens their right to vote, we are undermining democracy. We are silencing their voices. We are putting people in power who are making policy decisions who are not fully representative of the will of the people. And we see that having a cumulative effect. And so where we are right now in this 2018 election is that people are feeling a sense of urgency, that it feels like the nation is on this precipice where we can either decide to move forward or we can decide to move backward. And that is what is at stake in this election. But that is the cumulative effect of systematic denial of voting rights to American citizens over a period of time.
Would you say there's a period in this country's history where voter suppression wasn't taking place?
I would say that there was a period in this nation's history where it wasn't taking place as often or as with a level of impunity, and that was after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And so I'm a historian, so I'm going to do a kind of brief, quick history. What we were dealing with was that coming out of 1890 with the Mississippi Plan, which dealt with massive disfranchisement of the black population, and you had a series of different mechanisms in place, a poll tax, literacy test, white primary, etc. And we also had election day terrorism. By the time we're getting into the 1960s, we're seeing some places like in Mississippi where there are counties that are over 50% African American and they will have 0 number of African Americans registered to vote, or they will have 1 African American registered to vote. It was so tight, and we see as part of the civil rights movement, that access to the right to vote was a key element in the civil rights movement. We think about Selma and the Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That, along with the bludgeoning death of Reverend James Reed, led to the Voting Rights Act. What the Voting Rights Act did is said, look, we've had enough of this. You know, it's kind of like when your mother says, don't make me have to come up there. Well, that's what the federal government did. You know, it was like, look, we told you in 1867, you didn't want to listen. We told you again in 1870 with the 15th Amendment, you didn't want to listen. We told you again in 1957 with the Civil Rights Act, and again you're hard-headed. We told you again in 1960, don't make me come up there. In 1965, the federal government came up there and said, look, you obviously aren't going to do this the way you're supposed to. So we're going to have to pre-clear. That means every change that you make in your voting laws are going to have to be approved by the U.S. Department of Justice or by the federal courts in D.C. What pre-clearance did is it put a stop to all of the mess. Not a stop, but it put a heavy block to all of the mess and all of the game, tweaking a word here, tweaking a thing here, tweaking a piece there, but still having the same kind of massive disfranchisement. It worked. As I said, early 1960s, the black voter registration in Mississippi was in the single digits. By 1967 or 68, it was almost 60%. That is the power of the Voting Rights Act. You have the first African American elected to office in Mississippi, like in 1967 or so. I mean, at first since Reconstruction. So this thing is working. By the time we got to the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006, the U.S. Department of Justice between 1982 and 2004, 2006, I can't remember that last date because I'm a historian, but I don't do dates. They had blocked, the U.S. Department of Justice had blocked over 700 changes that these pre-cleared districts were trying to make, and they had blocked them because they were racially discriminatory. So even with the Voting Rights Act, you have these jurisdictions, these states, these counties that are still trying to change their rules and do so in a way that discriminated against minorities and blocking their access to the voting booth.
So, you know, as we were talking about in the car ride over, I was saying how one of my definitions of privilege is that which you don't have to think about. You know, that's, for me, it's just that simple. If I don't have to think about it, then that's where my privilege is, as opposed to if I have to think about it, then that's probably where I'm not privileged. So, you know, I was born in the 60s as all of this stuff was being fought out, so by the time I'm old enough to vote, I'm sure a lot of you in this room can relate to this, you just take it for granted. I mean, you register, you vote. Who's suppressing? How can I be suppressed? But that's because I had the privilege of getting a driver's license at 16 and being educated and having parents that would have killed me if I did not vote. And so talk to us a little bit about why it isn't as simple as it looks.
And so the movement toward, so I've got to do, again, a bit of history to get us to where we get to voter ID. Because that is one of the mechanisms that's in place now. And it's one of the mechanisms that's in place, and part of it is because it looks very reasonable, given what we are told is the threat to American democracy.
I've fallen for that. I mean, I've fallen for that whole, well, who doesn't have a driver's license? And so I started reading your book, going,
So, it actually, we think about that 2000 election. Remember the hanging Chad election? Yeah, that's almost like PTSD on that one, isn't it? Ooh, that was hard. But it actually, where this thing of the myth of voter fraud comes from is Missouri. Woo! St. Louis. In St. Louis, in the 2000 election, shortly before, the St. Louis Board of Elections had illegally purged, nearly 50,000 voters off of the rolls. And so they knocked these folks off of the rolls, but they didn't tell them. So folks are coming to the polls to vote. and their names aren't there on the registers anywhere. And so the poll workers are then trying to call down to the Board of Elections to figure out what's going on, and the lines are jammed, they can't get through. So then they're just sending the people down to the Board of Elections to go, well, you figure it out. And so this is a Tuesday, remember, this is a Tuesday, this is a work day. So people thought they were just gonna go in and vote, but now they're down at the Board of Elections, and they're down there for hours. Hours, because the records aren't clear, the folks at the Board of Elections aren't really sure, hours are drizzling by. The polls are getting ready to close, and there are still people at the Board of Elections. So the Democrats sued to have the polls stay open for 3 additional hours, because you have all of these folks who wanted to vote, who had the right to vote, denied to them by being illegally purged. And the Democrats sued, and the judge said, yeah, this wasn't their fault. So yes, the polls will stay open until 10 o'clock to give them an opportunity to vote. The Republicans came in right after that and said, and got another judge, a higher judge, to close the polls. So those polls closed at 7:45. Now, the rationale, and so this was, for instance, U.S. Senator Kit Bond. And so what he said is that this was an attempt at massive voter fraud. This was an attempt to have dead people on the rolls voting. This was an attempt to have people voting over and over and over, using all the addresses from all of these vacant lots. This was a brazen, shocking attempt to steal the election. Voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud.
And I didn't even understand that one, because I was reading that, and I'm thinking, does anybody know the donut shop rule? If I'm standing in the door trying to buy a donut, as the business closes, I'm inside, I get my donut. Somebody walks up and tries to get the donut, the store is closed. Okay. Yeah.
Voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud. Because what is so important is the control of the narrative. And so then Senator Bond took this narrative into the U.S. Congress as a bill was going through called the Help America Vote Act. What the Help America Vote Act was supposed to do was to deal with the unease in the American population that democracy probably wasn't working like we thought it was working. Because apparently we couldn't even count votes. And we thought we ought to, as the world's greatest democracy, we should be able to count votes. But apparently in Florida, that wasn't possible. So, and I gotta say, when I'm teaching this, I'm like, the same thing happened in 1876 in Florida. And so part of what the Help America Vote Act did was to deal with the hanging chad machines, to get more updated machines that would actually be able to count votes. And it also dealt with creating a space, a condition, where people who had complaints about what was happening in the electoral process could complain. But Kit Bond added to the reality of what had happened in Florida, he added the myth of voter fraud and said this was also a threat. And so the way to deal with this threat was to just do something basically simple, which was to require an ID. And it sounded simple, it sounded reasonable given the scope of the threat. You have all of these people voting over and over and over, using other identities, using false addresses, etc., stealing an election. Except the St. Louis Post-Dispatch did an analysis of every one of Kit Bond's charges. I love good reporters.
We do too, at KCUR.
And what they found were that those vacant addresses, in fact, 82% of them weren't vacant. That condos were built on them, homes were built on them. They just hadn't, taken them off the books as vacant. And as they started going through each one of the charges, eventually, out of all of what he was saying was rampant, massive, brazen, shocking, they found 4 cases. But none of those 4 cases dealt with identity fraud. of voter fraud, we started getting voter ID laws. And then what happened was that the Help America Vote Act had a broad expanse of law, of different IDs that you could use. But when the first law came up in Indiana, the scope of the IDs began to narrow to government-issued photo ID. And then Georgia, I'm shocked it was Georgia. Georgia came right behind and said, hey, we got something real for you. And in narrowing the scope of what kinds of IDs are possible to be able to vote, we'll find that there's a disparate impact. And there's a disparity between, for instance, the percentage of African Americans who have driver's licenses as opposed to whites who have driver's licenses, who don't have driver's licenses, those sorts of things. And it deals with the issue of income.
I was going to ask you that question. I mean, whose votes are these suppressed? I mean, I assume it's the wealthy people who live in the suburbs, right? Those are the voters that we're trying to suppress, right?
So the way that this voter suppression works, let me deal with Alabama. Alabama's a good one. In 2011, so this is 2 years before the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act and the Shelby County v. Holder decision of 2013. In 2011, Alabama passed a voter ID law. That voter ID law had a narrow band of government-issued photo ID that would be acceptable identification to be able to vote. But Alabama knew that it could not get it through a Department of Justice pre-clearance because the law was, okay, so the Republicans actually recorded themselves. And they said, how are we going to depress the black voter turnout? Yes, that's on tape. And, because you have all of these illiterates and these aborigines who will get on these HUD-financed buses and go to the polls. And then you get the law. Now, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund looked at this and said, we noticed that you don't have public housing ID on the list. But public housing ID is certainly government-issued photo ID. And for many poor people, it's the only ID that they have. And in Alabama, which is a poor state, it ranks somewhere between 45th and 48th in terms of poverty. 71% of those in public housing in Alabama are African American. Alabama said, no, public housing ID will not count as an acceptable form of government-issued photo ID. Now, I'm thinking it doesn't get more government-issued than public housing. But your driver's license will count. Then Governor Bentley shut down the Department of Motor Vehicles in the Black Belt counties. So now people had to go 50 miles to get to the nearest Department of Motor Vehicles.
When they don't drive.
And they don't drive. And there's not public transportation. So how do you get the 50 miles? Because now we're talking about a 100-mile round trip. How do you do that? And so what you do is you create an obstacle. Oh, you need an ID to vote. But remember, we don't really have voter fraud in terms of the massive rampant. Justin Levin, a law professor out of California, looked at votes in the United States from 2000 to 2014. He found 1 billion votes and 31 cases of voter impersonation fraud out of 1 billion. So that's 0.0000. Where's my mathematician? 0, and so this is the massive rampant that people are talking about. So you create the illusion of a need that democracy is in peril. Then you sound reasonable in the way that you're going to save democracy. All you need is an ID. So now you've created the obstacle. And then you say, but not that ID and not that ID. And then we're going to shut down the ones that are the ways, the Department of Motor Vehicles that are close to you. So you create an obstacle to the obstacle. It is effective. In Wisconsin, in the 2016 election, 8% of whites were stopped by the voter ID requirement. 27% of African Americans. in the 2016 election were stopped by the voter ID requirements.
Sylvia Maria Gross, who is our roving reporter, and I get to boss her around, and she's my editor, so normally she bosses me around, so this is great. Sylvia, could you give us a question?
Tables have turned. Okay, there are two related questions here to what might be seen as legal voter suppression from Amber Rucker. How do you feel the Electoral College affects voter suppression and voter participation? And then I would say that this is somewhat related. As long as gerrymandering happens legally, is there any way to avoid voter suppression in fact or in spirit? That was from John Autry.
Great questions. The Electoral College, that was basically part of a deal by the Founding Fathers to get the Constitution ratified. Because the smaller states, and particularly the slaveholding states, were afraid that they were going to be always politically powerless unless they had that kind of that next tier, which is what the Electoral College brings. I can't stand the Electoral College. That's where I am right now, and because it violates. So think about this. There was a picture. I saw that there was a picture, and it had Al Gore, Tipper Gore, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and the caption said, 3 of these people won the popular vote for the presidency. One of them became president. Wow. That was the power of the Electoral College. We're going to have to do some work on that Electoral College because part of what we're also dealing with here in America is in some ways it's embedded in the kinds of concerns that happened at the founding of this nation. Smaller states, larger states, feeling like you're always going to not have a voice, that you're always going to be overwhelmed, and that's where we are right now in this nation as well.
I think the other day that one of the reasons the Electoral College doesn't seem to be challenged is whoever is the sitting president won the Electoral College.
I got a vested interest in this part. Yes. Gerrymandering. I've got a chapter, it's called Rigging the Rules in there, and I did a lot with gerrymandering. Gerrymandering also goes back to the founding. Patrick Henry hated James Madison from the depths and the breadths and the heights that his soul shall reach. And he gerrymandered the district where James Madison was going to be running for a seat in Congress and put him in the same district with James Monroe. Okay, so this kind of nastiness started early. What gerrymandering does is that the Constitution says after the census, then a legislative body draws the congressional districts to map out with the changing population shifts that are happening in the United States. And that sounds reasonable. But when folks have a vested interest in drawing the lines so that they consistently stay in power, so a key case that the Supreme Court kicked back is the Gilkey Whitford case coming out of Wisconsin, which was a case of what they called extreme partisan gerrymandering. And I think this gets to the question that you asked. After the 2010 election, a handful of Republicans basically sequestered themselves in a room and for 4 months with computer mapping software, high-powered computer mapping software, as well as with the kind of analytics, that kind of Facebook analytics to figure out what are the proclivities of the people who live where, and they started drawing the maps. They had 2 goals. One was to begin to eliminate as many of the competitive districts as they could. Because when you eliminate competitive districts, voter turnout goes down because you're figuring out those going to win anyway, you've been there since that was a pup, but then they're competitive is high. If you eliminate competitive districts, you depress and begin to demoralize the electorate. The second thing that was their goal was that regardless of how many votes the Republicans received, they would get the majority of seats in the state legislature. Let me say that again. Regardless of how many votes they received, they would always have the majority. The plan worked better than they thought. In the 2012 election, Democrats received 52% of the vote. Democrats received 39% of the seats in the state legislature. 52% of the vote, or let me put it another way, 48% of the vote, 61% of the seats. And each subsequent election, it became worse and worse. What that does is it creates these kind of rot boroughs. And because they're drawing the lines so that they don't have to be responsive to the electorate. If you can draw these really safe districts, you can have an unrepresentative representative. And what is also done is that you get what they call packing. So you take minority districts and you pack them all in one. So you don't have that kind of balance in terms of one person, one vote. You've got a city that's got maybe 2 representatives, and then you've got lots of suburbs and rural areas that have multiple Republican districts, safe districts. So by gerrymandering in some of the big states, we've ended up with somewhere between 16 to 26 additional Republican representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives. Yeah.
And that which does lend itself to that question. Why is it that people, whether we're talking voter ID, purging the voter rolls, gerrymandering, why is it that there's fear of the voting people of color, of young people, of the other one, poor people?
Okay, bring it.
Yes. What is it about them?
Okay, okay, we're going to do a history lesson again.
She teaches history.
There's my student Russ. It's so wonderful. The Southern Democrats, it was the solid Southern Democratic South, right? It was the solid Democratic South. And that is because they hated the party of Lincoln. Coming out of the Civil War, Lincoln was a Republican. They hated it. And they hated Republicans. And that solid Democratic South had a hold on Congress. And it had a hold on U.S. policy, which means it had a hold on civil rights policy. But as black folks started moving up north via the Great Migration, and then got the right to vote, and they started moving to these big electoral college states, Illinois, Chicago, Michigan, Detroit, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Ohio, Cleveland. As they started that move north, they started putting pressure on northern politicians to begin to pay attention to civil rights. And you begin to see that movement of African Americans out of the Republican Party into the Democratic Party. By the time we get to the Civil Rights Movement, and we're into 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, where Democrat Lyndon Baines Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and then signs the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Southern Democrats are like, there's no place for us in this party. I mean, my God, they believe that, I don't know, black people are equal. They believe in like citizenship. They believe in like civil rights. I mean, what are we supposed to do in this kind of party? And I'm thinking, wither away and go away, but no. The Republicans saw an opportunity. And that opportunity was to break the solid Democratic South once and for all. And so they began to woo them in with the Southern strategy. And the Southern strategy was saying, and Lee Atwater, who ended up being Reagan's strategist, said, you know, in 1954 you could say the N-word, and it wouldn't hurt you. But by 1968, you can't. It backfires. So you start talking economic things like taxes, and you start talking states' rights, you start talking busing, forced busing, but so you start getting really abstract. But the whole point is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. And that sort of strategy broke open the solid democratic South, where we start talking about the red states now, right? Well, what happened is when they moved that toxin of white supremacy into the Republican Party, it began to take over like a very virulent virus. I mean, it started taking over and it started pushing moderate Republicans out because the base was so energized on this toxin that politicians in the primaries had to play to that right-wing base.
Do we think we're back to that?
And so when you think about it, there were 16 candidates, Republican candidates, in the 2016 presidential primary. Many of whom had governmental experience, senators, governors. You know, they knew how to do policy. But the one who came to the fore, the one who got the most votes, was the one who offered birtherism. The one who came down an escalator saying Mexicans are rapists and criminals. That's the one. And so what that means is as the party moved further and further to the right, and as America became more and more diverse, that party's policies could not speak to the incredible diversity in America. And so in your policies, you refuse to alter your policies. Then your only strategy then is to silence that diversity.
Ooh, that's deep the way you put that.
Because that's what they've done. And so where we really see it is in the 2008 election of Barack Obama. Okay, how many of us have heard? How racist can America be? We elected a black man twice. Folks started smiling. Come on, y'all. Y'all know you heard it.
I have these broken.
Whoa, right? But we did not elect a black man twice. The majority of whites have not voted for a Democratic candidate for president since 1964.
That's an interesting, I'm sorry, that's an interesting fact. Say that again.
The majority of whites who have voted have not voted for a Democratic candidate for president since 1964. The majority of whites did not vote for Barack Obama in 2008. So how racist can we be? Because we elected. That we, what is being said, is talking about white Americans. But a sizable number of white Americans did vote for Barack Obama, but not the majority. But he had an incredible ground game. Grassroots organizing. And that organizing brought 15 million new voters to the polls. And those voters were overwhelmingly African American, Latino, Asian, young, and poor. They, with that coalition of a sizable number of whites, launched Barack Obama into the White House. But without that incredible ground game, and without that diversity, that doesn't happen.
And how did, what percentage of your book sell? I want to see how well you remember your own book. What percentage of the new voters that Barack Obama inspired to vote and to register? Yeah,
I think it's 69%.
that was what I remember too.
Woo! That won't happen again. I'm telling you, the little play cells are getting grabbed.
So I mean, 69%, 70% basically of new voters. I'm sure that's scary to people who.
Yeah, I can't remember which. I think it was the head of the RNC in 2012 where did all the Republicans go? Did they move to Utah? And I mean, so there was a lot of soul searching in the Republican Party about how to broaden its policy base, how to speak to this incredible diversity. But then the base rose up and said, "Oh, don't you dare!" And so you saw the party continue to move right. And so when you look at these voter suppression techniques, what they do is basically to target that Obama coalition. It goes after African Americans, Latinos, Asians, young, and the poor. The way they go after Asians, Latinos, and African Americans is with a program run by Chris Kobach. Oh, I knew we were in church and we were going to have a call response up in here.
You got the bells ringing?
Called Crosscheck. And what Crosscheck says it does is that it matches a series of parameters in different states to see if to stop these fraudulent voters from going from state to state, voting over and over, swinging these elections. Again, we've got the aura of voter fraud. But what is so the parameters? First name, middle name, last four of your social security, date of birth, and a suffix, junior, senior, like that. And so it sounds reasonable. Understand these policies always sound reasonable until you pull back that layer and you start looking. But what really happens is that states don't all use all of those parameters. Like, there are states that don't use the middle name at all. There are states that don't use social security numbers. There are states that don't use suffixes. So what you really end up with is some version of the first name and really the last name. But in the United States, minorities make up 85, are overrepresented in 85 of the top 100 most common last names. So if your name is Washington,
Or Johnson?
Johnson, yes, right? Okay. Or if your name is Garcia, Hernandez, Lee, Young. And so what happens then is that as people are being purged off the rolls, whites are underrepresented by 8% on the purge rolls via cross-check, because it's perseverating on the last name, so underrepresented by 8%. African Americans are overrepresented by 41%. Asian Americans are overrepresented by 31%, I believe, and Hispanics by 24%. The purging has led to 14% of African American voters in the U.S. being purged off of the rolls. 14% of black voters purged. This is devastating when you begin to think about some of the slim, narrow margins we have had, like in the 2016 election.
So since Chris Kobach was mentioned, I'm going to invite my KCUR colleague up on the stage for a few minutes to talk with us, because she has a piece on Chris Kobach that is running on October 21st on Reveal. And I gotta say, as part of reading your book and seeing you on Trevor Noah, when you talk about how you look up your voter registration every week, she looks it up every week. I looked mine up today, and I got mad. I looked at the inside, because it showed me it's not registered, even though I just voted in August. And it's because I put my middle name in. Back to your point. And I said, okay, let me drop Tyrene. And then it was there. I was like, okay, all right. I won't have to skip tonight's event. I gotta start something with state of Kansas. So tell us a little bit about your story, and I'm letting you two have for a minute, because you guys are the co-op experts.
So I'm an investigative reporter at KCUR, and I have been obsessed with the interstate cross-check system now, basically since 2017, because the election in 2016 triggered so many things for so many people. And you guys all know Chris Kobach. I think that I heard a murmur come up and the bell rang. So I don't have to give you guys any background on who Chris Kobach is. But let me just read a little bit from what Carol wrote about a guy named Chris Kobach. He hitched his star and his agenda, which had been nurtured in the worlds of virulent, anti-immigrant, anti-civil rights conservative circles for decades, to making crosscheck more robust, more pronounced, and frankly, more electorally lethal. So I have a story that's coming out on our national investigative reporting show called Reveal. It will air October 20th. And we essentially go into how crosscheck has become this tool for Chris Kobach to keep claiming this voter fraud. It's like you said about owning the narrative, Carol. He keeps talking about voter fraud, and he has yet to prove this. I mean, just over and over, studies show that any sort of voter fraud is just negligible. You can't use enough zeros.
Yes. Yeah. So even when he was on trial, and she said, and he said, it got into it because of the voter fraud. And she said, okay, where? Because we have voter fraud. No, where? Because it is.
And this federal judge, it was actually the voter ID lawsuit that was brought by the ACLU. And that lawsuit, ultimately, Judge Julie Robinson in Kansas, a U.S. district judge, she found that there was no evidence of this, and she called Kobach on the carpet for it. And she even said, you are the only prosecutor in the U.S. who has, the only Secretary of State in the U.S. who has prosecutorial powers, and you have not charged one non-citizen with voting. Not even one. He has not found one. The handful of cases that he has found of these double voters have mostly been older white men who are Republican. And they're just a little confused sometimes. And I actually feel very sorry for them. I've talked to some of them and they're embarrassed.
Lincoln Wilson.
Right. You tell the story of Lincoln Wilson. He's in your book.
Lincoln Wilson is in my book. And so Lincoln Wilson was a 66-year-old man who lived in Kansas, but he also had a home in Colorado. And he, as he said, well, you know, I voted local elections both in Kansas and in Colorado, particularly when he saw his property tax bill go up. He was like, oh, honey, we're not doing that no taxation without representation thing. So he's like, but I would only vote for the president in one state. And Kobach went, whoa. Now the local prosecutor was like, oh, this is no big deal. But Kobach went after that man with a vengeance. $50,000 later in legal fees. And then it was like $1,500 in court costs and fines and 3 convictions for it, you know, and Lincoln Wilson and Kobach was like, hey, yeah, see, this is just the smoke, this is just the fire.
He's a pretty expert. I was going to say he's a pretty expert.
The tip of the iceberg, that's his metaphor, the tip of the iceberg. And I'm like, no, baby, that's not even a sliver of ice. But Lincoln was like, you're damn right I'm mad. He came after me for an honest mistake.
Was he black or white?
He was a white man.
No, he's black. He's the long black.
He's the long black man.
He's the long black man who has been prosecuted.
The long black man.
The others have been mostly white guys.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think maybe one white woman.
Okay, so, you know, and Lincoln is like, you know, what did I do wrong here? But $50,000 later.
And most of these men have been very embarrassed by this. I mean, these are guys who haven't even had parking tickets, and all of a sudden they're on the front page of their local paper in like Hutchinson, and it says, you know, this guy has been charged with a felony because he's, you know, doing voter fraud. So you really kind of feel, you know, bad for these guys. But Chris Kobach took his voter ID law, and he has been writing away, and he was the one named President Trump's director of the Election Commission. I'm sure you guys all remember too, which quickly went down in flames. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Election Commission?
Oh, yeah, and so Trump told a lie. I know that's shocking. And, you know, and he said that he would have won the popular vote too if it hadn't been for the 3 to 5 million people who voted illegally.
The number he got from Chris Kobach.
Okay. And so he creates this commission to go hunt down all of this illegal voting. And he names Mike Pence and Chris Kobach as the folks who are going to head this up. And Pence has his own voter suppression history. in Indiana, and it's not pretty. And so you've got, and then it is stacked with basically the rogues gallery of vote suppressors. So you have J. Christian Adams,
Hans van Spankowski.
yes, yes, I mean, that almost sounds like a villain's name.
But they didn't operate for very long because basically they asked for every state's voter registration rules and states said, no, we're not going to do that. So it quickly sort of burned itself out.
Yeah, and it did so, and I mean, and because what they were asking for wasn't just regular data. They were asking for, and how do these people vote? So, and what kind of felony who has a felony? I mean, so they're asking all kinds of things in there that looked like it was to create this national database so that you could then go after a really national massive voter purge.
And they wanted to create a federal cross-check. And that's what Kobach was starting to do. One of the members on the commission, a Democrat, who was just
Mike Dunlap out of Maine.
out of Maine, he sued the commission, got a lot of documents, and they've been put online, and it showed that they wanted to start this federal cross-check. But that quickly died.
I still try to figure out this 2 to 3 million people who were illegally voted, because I live in Wyandotte County, and I live in the African American part of town that's poor, and there are enough people who vote on voting day to comprise that many illegal votes. I mean, I still get irritated every time they take my driver's license and they go, what's your name? And every time I have to go, it's on the driver's license, it's just waiting to enter. But okay, you know, it's just, and I think about the people that makes them really nervous for whatever reason.
And so the process is designed to intimidate. It is designed to intimidate. And once we understand that that's what it's designed for, but what I love about when they ask all those states, so you got Mississippi, and Mississippi said, you can go jump in the Gulf when you get that. And I went, woo, Mississippi. But you had California going, I don't think so, not today. And you had Kansas going,
Even Kansas.
even Kansas. So Kobach
Straight down is up there.
yes, because it was nobody, and there was issues about security.
Security is a very good issue. And in fact, that's a story I'm doing too. So there's this great citizen watchdog from Mission Hills, you guys, Mission Hills. This woman who just became obsessed with cross-check. And she found all these security breaches, and so I'm writing about her, and she'll be on this show. And she is the one that basically got cross-check closed this year. Department of Homeland Security came in and shut it down. And it hasn't been operating during the midterm, which has been embarrassing, really, to the state of Kansas and to Chris Kobach, who's writing it into the governor's seat, though. And I'll stop after this, Michelle.
No, before you leave, I want to get to see if you want to help answer a question that we have.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And it's related to what you're talking about. I think there's several questions about legal remedies to some of the issues that we're talking about right now. One is Thurgood Marshall and the original civil rights leaders found success through litigation. Given the number of GOP-appointed judges in lower courts, what is your prediction of legal challenges to voter legislation today? And I'll ask a couple more legal challenge questions just to group them all together. One is from Mary Ellen Schultes. Has there been any legal remedy to Alabama's refusal to honor public housing identification? And then a question about the upcoming gubernatorial race in Georgia that is being pressed for voter suppression under the Republican candidates. Who is over the election board? What can be done at this late date? What are the legal remedies to some of the problems that we're talking about?
So one of the, basically to me, one of the deals that was cut between the establishment GOP and Trump was that he would get to raise the kitty and they would get to stuff the judiciary. And so so you see, the Federalist Society has just basically given him a list. You know, so Mitch McConnell basically refused to put a lot of Obama's nominees through for the opening slots in the federal judiciary. That created this massive gulf that now is being flooded, and we're not getting the kinds of reviews by the Senate Judiciary Committee. The ABA, the American Bar Association, in fact, has ruled several, not just one or two or three or four or five, but several of the nominees as unqualified. And I think only one or two of them have been turned down, but the others have been put on the federal bench. Once you stop that federal bench, you're able to then shape the laws of this nation for at least a century. That's what this is designed to do. We're in trouble. But we fight. And that's one of the things, like when I talk with my students, I think about the way the black folks have had to fight. Black folks have never had a system that has honored them, that has respected them and has respected their rights. I think about my father, who fought in World War II, fighting for democracy, where he didn't have democracy. He couldn't vote. I think that, so after the 2016 election, the next semester I'm teaching civil rights movement class. And I said, imagine, you have a mayor that hates you. You have a school board that doesn't want your children educated. You have state representatives who don't believe they represent you. You have senators and congressmen who just want you gone. And you have a president that can't stand you. And they were like, ugh. And I said, but you know what? The folks in Mississippi figured it out in 1950. And they're like, yeah, because they were dealing with the judiciary that did not believe in civil rights. They were dealing with political leaders at all levels that did not believe. And they found ways, those civil rights leaders in that question, the Thurgood Marshalls, the Walter Whites, the Roy Wilkinses, the Martin Luther Kings, the A. Philip Randolphs, they figured it out. And part of that figuring out was to draw upon the strengths in the grassroots community. And then figure out where the allies were and where the weaknesses were, and then hit it. And that is that kind of strategizing that has to go on now. To think through, how do we have a truly vibrant democracy? Because when we don't, when we squeeze people out, when we tell them they don't matter in a democracy, we're creating millions and millions of alienated citizens. And when you have alienated, disaffected, disengaged citizenry, as a nation, you're in trouble. Georgia. I know what Ray Charles saying. Georgia. So I'm in Georgia. I wrote a piece in the New York Times. But it's called Brian Kemp, Enemy of Democracy. Because I couldn't figure out, we had a Republican runoff in for the governor's race between Casey Cagle and Brian Kemp. Casey Cagle was lieutenant governor. They were trying to outdo themselves. So, like, there's an ad where Brian Kemp has his gun like this, and his daughter's date is right there. And he's like, so you date my daughter? I mean, imagine that as an ad. Yes, that's the look. Imagine that as the ad for governor, where, and they try to outdo each other in terms of their hatred of immigrants. Well, I'm going to round them up in my pickup truck. Well, I'm going to get a big bus and take, it was just, but Kemp did not endorse Trump in 2016. But toward the end, when that election was getting toward the end, Trump came out and endorsed Kemp. And I went, oh, because Cagle was billing himself as the Trumpian conservative. particularly in a state that is growing increasingly diverse, where whites will be the minority in a few years.
The Atlanta mayor, black woman, Keisha.
Keisha.
Mayor Keisha.
Yeah, and before that, it was, God, not Lonnie. You know.
Yes.
Yes,
Both of our memories are gone.
yes.
Yep.
And so it's called like the new majority. And there have been organizations that have been registering this new majority to vote. Kim has been suppressing that vote. And that's what Trump needs. He needs a voter suppressor who can keep Georgia red, who can keep the House of Representatives, the members coming out of Georgia being Republicans, as he knows he's going to be facing something tough after 2018, as the Mueller investigation keeps going. I mean, so there's a buy-in for Trump here. Lately, what we found with Kemp, so Kemp, when I say Kemp has, since the end of the Shelby County, since the Voting Rights Act, he's closed 214 polling stations in Georgia, mostly in black districts, in poor neighborhoods, 214. What we know is that for every 1/10 of a mile that you move a voting spot from the black neighborhood, the black voter turnout goes down by 25%. In Sparta, Georgia, they tried to do a consolidation of the polls and move the one from the black neighborhood 17 miles away. The NAACP and the ACLU stopped that, but it requires that level of eternal vigilance. They just tried to close the one in Randolph County, which was over 60% black, and they closed 7 of the 9 polling places in Randolph County.
Shameless plug, this reveal episode on October 20th on KCUR 893 will also be, we've done data on the voter rolls in Georgia. And as well as closing polls, the other problem in Georgia, it has one of the highest numbers of knocking felons off the rolls because they have lots of vote. And that's another thing to go to.
Yes, I mean, felony disfranchisement is another way. If you, as we know, anybody here read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow? Yeah. Great book. And what she deals with there is the war on drugs and how it has led to mass incarceration and the disparate effect of the criminalization of blackness is what's happening there. Because African Americans for marijuana do drugs at the same rate as every other racial and ethnic group. About 12%. And actually, in terms of cocaine, do cocaine the least. But African Americans are incarcerated for drug usage at a much higher rate. So that 12% of drug use becomes 33% of those incarcerated for drug use. How do you take 12% and make it 33%? And so what happens then is you have a large number of African Americans, particularly in states that have felony disfranchisement, who become disfranchised, who lose their voting rights because of this felony conviction.
And think about the fact that there are states where blacks are in jail for felony conviction of selling marijuana, in a state where white people in general have dispensary license for selling marijuana. Just saying.
So in Florida, because Florida is a sweet beast for this one, because they have a ballot initiative right now going on. So nationwide, over 6 million people have lost their right to vote because of felony disfranchisement. 6 million. 1.7 million of those are in Florida. And Florida is one of the few states, there are only 4 states that have permanent felony disfranchisement. So what permanent means in Florida is that after you serve your time, and then after you do what they say, you get off paper, after parole, then you have to wait 14 years before you can individually petition the governor's commission. That means 4 times a year. Now you think about what that backlog looks like when most of those who are permanently disfranchised in the United States are in your state. It is designed to keep them off the rolls. So in Florida, 40% of black men are disfranchised because of felony convictions. 40%. Over 20% of African American adults total are disfranchised in Florida because of a felony conviction. What that does then is that Florida is able to count those heads in the census in order to get the representatives in Congress based on that head count. But those people cannot vote for their representatives. They have no say. It is like the 3/5 rule all over again. So there's a ballot initiative. Many people didn't think it was going to happen, but you had over 700,000 people that signed a ballot initiative to put on there to, in fact, re-enfranchise those who have felony convictions. And there are some caveats in there, but it's going to re-enfranchise, if it passes, and I think it's going to require 70% passage rate, I'm not sure on that. But if it passes, you're going to be able to see over 1 million people being able to get their voting rights back. You're going to be able to, because right now we call it civic death. Imagine you're sitting here and you know that you want to vote on the school board because you want your babies to be able to have somebody on the school board who really gets what your child needs. But you can't because you have a felony conviction. Imagine you really want to be able to have some say about zoning boards and school boards and who the mayor is going to be, who the president is going to be, and you can't because of a felony conviction. So you feel like a partial citizen at best. That's what we're talking about in terms of civic debt. And so so we're talking about how do we reintegrate people back into society after they have been incarcerated. One of those ways is to begin for that kind of engagement in the civic life of this nation. And that is what reenfranchisement can do.
Hey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sylvia, we have time for a question more. Shamelessly plugging, it's not my story, but October 21st, reveal, correct?
October 20th.
2020?
Well, it comes out that weekend, so the podcast is fantastic too.
Okay, all right. October 20th. Okay.
Couple questions about voter registration and voter ID. Broad question, what system of voter registration would you institute? And if free IDs were offered as valid voter IDs, would that still have a disparate impact? Andrew's asking that.
Great, thank you for those questions. As much as we've been talking about voter suppression, because we must, there are states that are asking a very different question. How do we get more of our citizens engaged? How do we get more of our citizens to vote? And so Oregon led the way. Oregon already has one of the highest voter turnout rates in the nation. But Oregon wasn't satisfied. And so Oregon instituted automatic voter registration. So the moment that you have some engagement with the Department of Motor Vehicles, you are automatically registered to vote. You have to opt out. Right now, to register to vote, you've got to opt in. And so what that has done is that Oregon's, after automatic voter registration, Oregon's voter turnout rate went up by 4 percentage points. Already it was high. It went up by 4 percentage points. And the diversity of its electorate also increased. Oregon went, yeah, I don't know what else we can do. California said, wait a minute, hold my beer. As California was concerned, because its voter turnout rate was 42%. And they're like, And so it instituted automatic voter registration. But it went one better. And it said, you know, the youth are our future. Why don't we pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds so that when they turn 18, they're automatically registered to vote. Then it was, and fact check me on this one, I can't remember whether it was Illinois or Minnesota, then said, okay, I got one better for you. Not everybody deals with the Department of Motor Vehicles. So why don't we expand the agencies where our citizens go? So we'll have one of the sites for automatic voter registration. The agencies that deal with aid to dependent children, AFDC, welfare, that can be one of our sites. Among these three sites, we may be able to get even more of our citizens registered to vote automatically. And so you have these states who are really thinking through. So yes, I think automatic voter registration, for those states that don't, I think same-day registration, having these kind of artificial cutoff dates where, if you can't get there by October 9th or October 10th or whatever, then, oh, well, I guess you got to sit this one out. And why? That we haven't received any real reason why. There are states that do same-day registration, and they don't have a problem. So we're able to do it. We choose not to do it because it is a way then to continue to winnow away the electorate. I think as well, right now I think we need a new Voting Rights Act. The one that the Supreme Court gutted has allowed these states to run wild. They have lost their minds. But that means that we're also going to have a Department of Justice that believes in voting rights. And the one we have right now does not. The reason why I don't believe in the whole ID thing is because the reason for the rationale for the need for an ID was based on the myth of rampant, massive voter fraud. If we see the terrain, okay, well, we're going to get an ID for everybody, so we're going to create this incredible apparatus where everybody can have the ID that they need to vote, then to me that is seeding the terrain of saying, so yes, there must be this massive rampant voter fraud that now requires everybody to have this ID. But before this whole ID thing came into being, they couldn't identify massive rampant voter fraud happening. So let me give you the case of Crawford v. Marion County in Indiana. Indiana passed a law in 2005 requiring a government-issued photo ID. The NAACP, ACLU, and the Democratic Party sued. Case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Indiana could not identify one case in its entire history of voter impersonation fraud. Not one. Not when the legislation was being debated and coming up. Not when they were going before the federal courts, and not when they were arguing before the U.S. Supreme Court. Could not identify one case in its history. The NAACP and ACLU were like, okay, so I need to understand what the state interest is here. If you don't have voter fraud, you haven't had it in your entire history, then what is the need for this ID? And they said, yes, but we're offering free IDs. If you don't have an ID, we can get you a free one. Yeah, that's not a free one. But there was and I know, you know how if you pull on the string, the box is going to come down on you. Well, here's the box. There were people who did, for instance, have a birth certificate. When people are poor, and in rural areas, for instance, they don't have a birth certificate. Many were born not in a hospital, so they don't have a birth certificate. So you got to get a birth certificate to get the ID. Well, in Marion County in Indiana, for instance, in order to get a driver's license, you needed a birth certificate. But in order to get a birth certificate, you needed a driver's license. So, because you didn't have the birth certificate, you couldn't get the free ID. But you couldn't get the birth certificate without the driver's license. And so this is what I mean by, so it looks like it's reasonable. Remember, it always looks reasonable. But then when you start pulling it back, you're like, wow. So not one case. Now, so let me tell you what the U.S. Supreme Court did, and I know this is going to shock you. Justice John Paul Stevens, he said, well, Indiana has not been able to identify one case of voter impersonation fraud in its entire history of the state. And it's clear that this law, SCA 483, can only stop one type of voter fraud, and that's voter impersonation fraud, which the state has not been able to prove has ever happened. But, you know what's coming. There have been cases before, in other places, like in 1868 in New York City with William Ross Tweed. What? And then he went to St. Louis.
Because it always goes back to Missouri.
It always comes back to the big ball. Then he goes back to Missouri with the dogs and the dead people and all of the stuff that had already been debunked by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And so based on 1868 with a machine, so not individuals, but a machine still in an election, the Supreme Court said that the voter ID law is constitutional. So that's why I don't see that territory, because that lie of voter fraud has done damage to our democracy.
So before we have one more question from the audience and then wrap this up so that we can move into the food portion of the minutes. Because if you're like me, I gotta know when we're timing food. I just wanted to say that you were a professor at the University of Missouri in Columbia for 12 years.
Yes.
So when she has Missouri snide comments, there's some righteousness. Just wanted to, help you out. Okay, all right. So,
How do you see social media suppressing and manipulating, and it says primary elections, but I would ask elections in general?
So the role of social media. Social media is really fascinating because it's really easy to get into your bubble. Social media allows you to be in a space where you don't have to hear facts. If that's the pathway you choose to take. And we know that there has been significant interference in, so I talk about it in the book, the Russians. So the Russians, bless their hearts. See, I'm almost Southern too. So one of the things that the Russians did, and I'll say this, I know where Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign goes. And that is that voter suppression hacked our democracy long before the Russians ever did. And we have to understand that. Because what voter suppression did was it painted a sign that said, hit here. This is the target. And so what the Russians did, the Russians played at least a twofold game. One part of that game was to develop an online presence as a black activist, right, for the people. Yeah. And so there was in Buffalo, a young black woman died in jail, kind of like Sandra Bland. And the black community was organized. And the Russians hopped in there this is messed up, and was getting its creds. And because you don't see folks, so all you know about folks that you're seeing is how they're tweeting, right? Or the posts that they're making on Facebook. And they got the language, they got the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And after they had developed their creds, then they started tweeting. And we need to show them our power. Because, Hillary, Trump, they're all alike. It's all alike. We need to not vote. Yeah, let's show how powerful we are. We need to sit this one out. Yeah. And we begin to think about it. Because the Russians understood the power of the black vote to the Democratic Party. That if you get enough of African Americans sitting out and protest, then you can begin to change the election. And so they were doing that. It wasn't just in Buffalo. There are documented sites where they are hitting hard
say, I was just gonna say, the Russians are deep.
Ooh. And, you know, and, you know, my field is U.S. Cold War history. I know the Russians. and on the Breitbart persona, what they were doing was they were going to really tweeting hard in states like North Carolina, a massive voter suppressor state. Going, we got rampant voter fraud happening over here. We got rampant voter fraud happening over there. What are we going to do to shut this down and keep our elections clean? Wow. So you want to talk about really gearing up the Republicans to go after this massive rampant voter fraud. I mean, so social media plays a big role, and it requires us to have a level of savvy on social media. Social media can be a powerful tool for organizing. It can be a powerful tool for sharing information, but it can also be a powerful tool for systematically weakening American citizenry and American democracy. So we have to engage social media the way we engage all kinds of information. We have to use critical thinking skills. We have to be willing to ask the next question. When we're asking that next question, folks begin to dissemble because they got the sound bites, but they don't have much depth after the sound bites. There was a wonderful example. There was a guy who was doing the Confederate memorials, our Southern history, our Confederate flag, our Southern history, and the Civil War wasn't about slavery, it wasn't just about slavery. And instead of somebody just saying, you, they said, oh, so what else was it about? And he said, no, you said it wasn't just about slavery. What were the other causes? And he was, well, it was tyranny. So how do you define tyranny? Well, you know, it's when,
And usually those people don't even know how to spell tyranny. I've been in enough of those conversations.
it's like when people like try to control other people. And you said, you mean like slavery?
This has been great. I have thoroughly enjoyed having a conversation with you, and I'm really jealous we have to move on to another city because I kind of wanted to take the day off work tomorrow and spend the day talking about this with you because this is great. But so let's all thank